Hi folks, this is James Weatherly broadcasting live from Las Vegas, whatever we call it, Studio 515, my room number. Hi folks, this is James Weatherly broadcasting. Okay, got to adjust my volumes and everything. They are apparently coming through. Haven't ever tried one of these broadcasts from a remote site, so we'll see how this goes according to what I'm showing on my feed. Excuse me, got an itchy nose. Is we're going to have a good stream. Hopefully we'll have some people joining us here in a little bit as we get ready to go. I always start off with a few minutes on the pre-show, make sure the equipment's working and everything. If you've been following me on Twitter, you know that I've been flying out here in Vegas here a little bit, and so that's why I'm broadcasting from here. Today's show is about how to find a pilot job. I want to tell you, I've been doing this for a long time. I've never, ever seen anything like the demand for pilots that's out there. It just really is blowing my mind. I was talking with our other pilot, Scott, and we've both been doing this for a long time, so we have never seen anything like this. I have heard stories from people I know who were hired in the mid to late 1960s where there was a pilot shortage. You just hired with no flight time or experience at all, put right into play as a second officer, and even if they were short something, the airline would send them out for a little additional training. It's kind of mind-blowing. During my era, there was nothing like that. Mostly a glut of pilots, super qualified, a limited number of jobs, and pretty well fought hard to get those jobs. So today, what we're going to do is talk about how you'd actually go about finding a pilot job. Even though there's a shortage, it's still not that easy. There are a number of barriers to finding these pilot jobs. So that's what we're going to talk about. And the areas, when we start at the top in a couple of minutes, we're going to look at where would you even get trained to be a pilot. Maybe you're not a pilot. Maybe you got a private pilot, maybe you're halfway through your training. How do you get the training, and how would you pay for it? That's a pretty biggie there. I'm going to go over some of your options for you. The next is, how do you get through that new barrier that was established a few years back? You have to have an ATP, an airline transport license in the U.S. to fly. They won't even let you in the cockpit. It used to be a commercial instrument multi-engine was sufficient if you were a second or a first officer, but now you got to have it. So you've got to get 1,500 hours unless you have a military background, or if you have a graduate from a certified aviation college. There are some slight reductions. Then we're going to talk about a real important thing, networking. And you'll see on that slide when I get to that, the important thing is there's a human being on the other side of the computer. No matter whether you're filling out all these applications online. In my days, we'd print out resumes, mail them off, and wait for a reply in the snail mail. And maybe if you're real fortunate, you get a telegram or a call. Now everything's done on the internet, but there's still a human being, and we're going to talk about the extreme importance of networking. And you should begin that today if you're thinking about becoming a pilot. And then the last thing we'll look at is setting up our targets to actually become a pilot. Now, before I get going, I'm just going to check the live chat, make sure that it's working, and then everybody can read it. I'm going to type a little something in there. Hello. Welcome, everyone. Please let me know you're there. Sign in to the chat. Okay, so that's working for me, and I'm sure as we get further along, there'll be some other people signing up. You'll see that on your right-hand screen, but that's how you send me questions. Tell me things that you want to talk about, because this is for you. Okay, it's the top of the hour coming up here in just right now, so we're going to switch over to the next screen. And for everybody joining us here at the top of the hour, today's broadcast on Ask a Pilot Live is all about How would you find a pilot job? In the pre-show, we just talked a little bit about that, but that's what we're going to be talking about today. I look forward to getting some of your questions, if you have any, and kind of covering that for you. Okay, now the next thing is everybody gets a little advertisement at the first of the program, let you know what's going on. So here we go with the advertisement. 1, 2, 3. Okay. If you want to keep up with what we're doing, I have a lot of followers following me on YouTube, Twitter. One of the main things is I usually try to send something out 6 days a week on Twitter, usually multiple ones. If I'm flying, I'll send you some pictures and things that we're doing. For Twitter, you can follow me at JTWPilot, just like the channel name, just @ JTWPilot, and follow me on Twitter. Also, if you want to keep up with all our broadcasts on YouTube, you can subscribe now. If you're new to YouTube, when you hit the subscribe button, you got to hit this little bell. If you don't ring that bell, YouTube now only gives you occasional notifications. Also, I do several podcasts a month. You can listen to those either on Anchor Radio, or you can listen to all of them on iTunes, Apple Podcast. All right. And next thing, if you're joining along with me and you want to help support the channel, there's a couple of ways you can do that. One, you'll see at the bottom of your live chat, there's a little button that says Super Chat, has a little $sign. If you click on that, then you get a choice of sending me a few dollars to help support and defer the cost of operating the channel. You do that right there on your live chat button. And the last way that we support our channel is what we call the coffee fund. Buy me a cup of coffee. You'll see this on Twitter, and usually on every link I put this, you can go to our web page that's shown on the right, and that web page will say buy me a cup of coffee, and you just go right down there at the bottom, select what you'd like. It's $3 through $15. It's a one-time quote, buy me a cup of coffee, and it helps support our channel. And I do appreciate everyone who supports those on a regular basis. Okay, now, I see there's a number of people watching here, and I do encourage you to log in if you got any questions as we go through that. Okay, again, the subject today is how do we find a pilot job? And we're actually going to go through some steps. Now, this, hey, Thomas, how are you doing? Hey, Thomas, I didn't bring my book with me, but I'm about on page, 40 or 50, people from the Falcon are working on the drones and stuff, so I am reading along. He's got a book called Indefensible, and so I make a little plug for that. Okay, now, there's going to be a lot of information here. I will replay this broadcast so you can take notes later if you need it. I know that not everybody's looking for a pilot job that's listening here today. I see we have a number of people tuned in. But you might know somebody looking for a pilot job. Like my friend Micah, he's in flight school. He's actually working part-time at a furniture store to pay for his flight lessons. And he said, I got a big sale, but hey, I need to hear this information, so I will replay it. Now, let's get started here in this. Here is the first step in getting a pilot job. You got to get trained. Yeah, when I was a kid starting out in all this stuff, it just seemed overwhelming. Here I'm sitting, I don't know, I've got a lot of jet type ratings. I've got a pocket full of license. I have 16,000 hours of experience. I fill out an insurance form. I just ask them, what do you need? But hey, I'm at the end of my career. I am at the final bits of it. When you're starting out, you got to get trained, So here's your basic options for getting trained as a pilot. First of all, in pretty much anywhere in the world, you can get selected for the military, and the military pays for your entire training. Armed forces throughout the world require pilots. Now, there's not as many like in the United States Air Force. I don't think the flight schools, which are called UPT, undergraduate pilot training, have any kind of the busyness they used to. I just flew over Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix, Arizona yesterday, was talking to the military controller. They used to be so busy they couldn't even stop talking, but they're not training quite as many pilots. But basic For getting into there, there's a huge selection process. You've usually got to graduate from college and then put in a selection, and they do select pilots. They put you in jet airplane, they train you, you get a lot of experience. It's usually a fairly lengthy commitment now. It was in the 50s and 60s as short as a couple of years. Now it's a lot longer, but they've made it a lot more lucrative. Of course, you have to understand that flying for the military means you will be taking part in combat action potentially. So that's one place. And military pilots, when they end their period of service, have generally an excellent reference for going to work for corporations, airlines, whatever it is. The second way that you can get trained, in certain parts of the world, you can become an airline-sponsored cadet. When I was at KLM, this was unbelievable. Now, this is several years ago, but if you were in the age range of about 19 years of age, so you've kind of completed like a junior college training. And I'm going to adjust my camera. I see it's just got a little bit of a craziness in the mirror. Thank you. If you're done the equivalent of junior college in the States, you'd go through a selection process. It was just like the military. If you were selected to become a KLM pilot, they sent you to 2 years, all expenses paid training. And then once you complete that training, you'd go through further training with KLM, and you'd fly with a guy like me. During cruise flight, you'd be what's called a second officer, or we call them in Dutch the tweede, and you'd sit and operate the radios for a couple of years. Then after that, you'd go into like the City Hop or a small jet or turboprop and begin building your experience. They paid for your training, plus you were guaranteed a job. I was in Goodyear Airport, where Lufthansa trains all their pilots out in Phoenix. So some airlines will select you, sponsor you, and pay for all the training. If you're a U.S.-based pilot, that is pretty rare. I understand that JetBlue is starting to consider doing that on a limited basis, and it could get to more and more airlines having to do that. That's mostly a European and foreign carriers do that, but there probably are going to be some opportunities in the U.S. Item number 3, if you're based in the U.S., and a number of people now do this in Europe, it's called pay for it yourself. It's out of your own pocket. I know that the KLMers now, that's basically you got to cough up money. They're no longer sponsoring unlimited rides. So you got to pay for it yourself. Now, it's a lot of money if you don't have any licenses to get what you need. Now, there's kind of 3 groups within that. I call the first the pay-as-you-go. You can simply go out to the local airport, to a flight school, and tell them, hey, I want to get my private pilot's license and learn how to fly. And then you get through that and say, oh, well, I'm thinking about being a professional pilot. I might want to get my instrument rating commercial. They offer courses for that, and you can pay as you go. I actually did kind of a combination of that myself. I had a lot of previous flight experience, so I got my private pilot's license. Then I realized at school we had a flying club, and it was sort of a pay-as-you-go process for me. Now, the second choice you can get is you can attend an aviation college around the world. There's some really large ones here in the United States, like Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, University of North Dakota. I don't know how many of these, but they're huge, huge programs, flight programs that you can go through. They're 4-year programs. You get your degree, you get your pilot's license, but they're generally very, very expensive. I mean, very, very expensive. You can easily spend, I'm pretty sure, a couple $100,000 US to complete them. I know they're lower cost options, but you're getting college and your flight training. The last one is a formal, it's kind of a European term, the Ab Initio. I hope I've spelled it right. I'm not sure on there. There are a number of companies offering that here in the United States. What Ab Initio means, I take you and you know nothing about how to fly. I take you in, like the military, and when you come out the other end, you're ready to go into work for an airline. Start to finish training, just like they would in the military. Now, there are a number of schools that do that. Flight Safety's had a big school over in Vero Beach for many, many, many years, training European pilots. You can enroll in that one. They have a complete Ab Initio. There's a school guy taught how to fly many years back called ATP. They have a huge program with agreements with a bunch of regional airlines where you can go in, you pay a fee. It's a pretty good bit of money, but a lot cheaper than the aviation college. They'll take you all the way through commercial, instrument, multi-engine, CFI, give you an instructor job so you can build up your 1,500 hours, and then essentially guarantee you an interview with one of several regional airlines, and it's all kind of a pre-done deal. That's a really good option. Whatever works for you, but that's the basics of getting trained. Now, let's go to the next one. How do I get through that 1,500 hour barrier? To give you a little background, there was a horrible crash in the United States in 2009 in Buffalo, New York. It was when a Q400, a stretched, super stretched kind of Dash 8 twin engine prop plane, was going to Buffalo, iced up. The crew stalled the airplane, fell out of the sky, killed everybody on the airplane, I believe killed one person on the ground. And then after a review of that, there were a lot of things came out that pilots were tired, they were poorly trained, they were inadequate experience, and of course, we're from the government, we're to help you. What are we going to do to solve this problem? Now, as a side note, at that time I was a director of training for a 121 carrier and had special insight to what happened in there, and I believe it was a training failure of the carrier. They should have downgraded the captain and never allowed him to pass due to some training issues. But hither, tither, yonder, the outcome of it was everybody in the airlines have to have an ATP. The basic for the United States, and if you're in Europe, that's just ATPL. In the United States, the minimum flight hours total required are 1,500 or 1,500 hours. That is a big barrier because remember, when you get your commercial and instrument, you got like 250 hours. You might have a little bit more by the time you do CFI and a couple things, but you're at least minimum 1,200 hours short of that when you come out of flight school. So that's a big barrier. There are a couple ways you can get that 1,500 hours. One is through a reduction. There is an authorized reduction, and the reduction is one legislated in. If you're a military pilot, you only have to have 750 hours if you're a graduate of active duty military flight school, so they cut the time in half. If you attend one of those aviation universities that are accredited and recognized like the ones I mentioned, I believe it is reduced to 1,250 hours. I gotta check that, but there is a reduction in that. If you're just a regular schmo like I was, it was 1,500 hours and your 23rd birthday. I took my ATP before I was 23, passed my check ride, and got a special letter from the FAA says, on his 23rd birthday, you will issue an airline transport pilot's license. And I actually took that in there, and they stamped me a license on my 23rd birthday, which was kind of cool. The guy remarked when I went in there and said, I've never seen this before. Well, I said, I got an early start. Okay, so much for ancient history. Now, I've showed you a little picture where you see new hire training plan. Some airlines are even addressing it. Here's an airline, we'll call it Brand X. They say, dream of becoming an airline pilot. Brand X will help you through the final steps of achieving this goal. It says, hey, you need some help. We've got a plan to even help you get through your final little hours that you might need to do. Amazing. They're going to help you get your last little bit of your ATP that needs to do. That tells me everything about the pilot shortage. Kind of mind-blowing. Now, let's move to the next step. Again, in my days, it was otters, not RJs. I started out in this little bitty turboprop airline. My first new hire in 1980 went to Convair 72s. It's a whole different world now. It took me forever to get to a jet airplane. I think by the time I got to actually steer, meaning a first officer on 72, I think I was somewhere about 5,000 hours. It went pretty slow between all this turboprop time, flight engineer time, and that was not uncommon. Now we're talking about you're going to get to steer right off the bat and have a window seat, which is pretty cool. Now, even with all this being said about the pilot shortage, you still got to get a job. Now, you're filling out all these applications and things online. I'm interested in this. Here, I upload my resume. I answer these online things. Golly, the forms are like forever. So we sometimes get a little lost in the fact that there's really another person on the other side of the computer. It is not a computer who's calling you for the interview. It's not a computer that's reviewing everything you've got. There may be a ranking that they put in there and these there, but somewhere there's a person on the other side of the computer. It took me a long time to learn that. That's probably the biggest shortcoming I had, is understanding there's a person who's somewhere going to sit down and recommend that they hire you. Now, there may be a board, several people voting on it, but it's going to be some person says, hey, let's hire this guy, or let's give him an interview. So one of the most important things you should begin if you're looking for a job is begin networking. What does networking mean? Working with other people, getting to know them, their contacts, and they may be able to help you. Do not underestimate this. Where do you find contacts that would fit in your network? First thing, people you simply know that work for airlines, fly for a corporation, whatever they do, you know them. Oh, hey, Joe Blow, yeah, he works as an analyst in the operations office. He doesn't have anything to do about pilots. Oh, but he works in operations. That's where pilots come under. He probably knows the chief pilot personally or the VP of flight ops. Oh, hey, I remember Harold. He's a co-pilot at United or something. Write down and make a note of the people you do. Start thinking about it. You may know a lot more people than you think. Write their names down. You need to know these people and start contacting them. You're going to do as simple as this. Hey, Joe, I know you're working for United. I'm now thinking about going to flight school. I'd like to become an airline pilot. Hey, got any suggestions? Hey, is United hiring? And just simple as that, just straightforward, asking for help and developing the context. You may not be far enough along in your training for anyone to really help you, but those contacts are everything. Second source of contacts is friends of friends. You might know, hey, somebody, your buddy Bob, and Bob happens to know Susie, and Susie is the secretary for the chief pilot. Hey, now that's a good contact because she organizes a lot of stuff for them. So, hey, it's friends of friends or friends of your family. Ask your moms and dads, your brothers, your aunts, your uncles. Find out who they know that's involved in aviation. They don't have to necessarily be a pilot. They don't have to hire pilots. But if they're inside, they're going to know who makes the decision. That's the key thing. The third thing, people that you meet at the airport. Hey, you find people all the time. I find people, I pull up my airplane. I'm retired from the airlines, but I'll meet people. They'll come up the airplane. Man, I'd love to fly this. I'd love to fly an airliner. What'd you say? Well, I'm a retired 7-4 captain here. You can watch my channel. Blah. Oh, man, that's awesome. Blah, blah, blah. And I'll have a card, exchange email. You meet a lot of people at the airport. Lastly, maybe you have an online presence, a Twitter, a Facebook, an Instagram. I don't know what all these things are, but the contacts that you get from that may be very key because there may be some people that you know who are involved in that. So make a list of those and start beginning to contact those people. Tell them what you're planning on doing. And hey, as you get closer to making an application and ready, you can get them to help you, get you to write a recommendation. I had just a quick story. When I retired from active flying, they had phased all the flight engineers out on the 7-4, and I knew some of them was working. They went to work for, some went to work as mechanics, others went to work as trainers at a big, I'll call it brand Bravo, a big training worldwide company. And I just happened to be talking to one on the phone. They said, hey, what are you doing? Well, my mom's not doing good. I'm taking a little early retirement. I'm going to go home. Oh, what are you going to do? I don't really know. Weren't you in charge of simulator training? Yeah. Dude, we need tons of instructors. Let me write you a recommendation. Well, I got a couple of people to write some recommendations. When I walked in the door and sat down, the head of hiring walked in, stood up, shook my hand, said, "Captain Weatherly, I'm looking so much forward to meet you. You have had so many recommendations. Our whole team is anxiously looking to meet you." Now, that's a good opening statement, and I did get the job. You know, you get people speaking on your behalf, that's a good way, helps your process go. Let's go to the next thing. If you're starting out in aviation and just kind of getting going, or you're well through your training, maybe you've got your first job, you kind of figure out your steps to getting a job. I would say, because it's usually not. I mean, it's now more than it has been. I heard a podcast with a guy who literally went through flight school, through one of these Ab Initio programs. He started as first officer. He jumped pretty quickly in a couple, 3 years to captain, and then he just went to the main line. He's been there a few years, and now he's looking at upgrading to captain of main line, all in about 6-7 years. Just mind-boggling to me. Sometimes that happens, but a lot of times there's a series of steps to get you where you want to go. So the first thing, and you may not know this answer, pick a target job. What do you want to do? Do you want to become a corporate pilot? Do you want to be a flight instructor your whole life? Do you want to teach in a simulator? Do you want to fly 747? Well, they're going to the garbage can, but 787, the biggest airliner. What do you want to do? Once you kind of figure out where you're going, you'll see there'll be a few steps. Let's say you say, well, I want to be an international long-haul airline pilot. Personal message me and I'll tell you, oh, you're jet lagged, you're tired, do something else. But I want to be on a 787. Well, if you're just in flight school, they are pretty desperate for pilots, but I don't think they're coming straight out of a piston airplane and putting you in as a co-pilot on a 787. Not yet, at least. So you're going to have to make some steps along the way. Even at KLM, back when we did this whole sponsored thing, you went through 2 years of really intense training, and you're still set for 2 years. So there's a number of steps. So find out what your job is. Figure it out. What do you really want to do? Airline pilot, corporate pilot, medevac pilot, it's just bazillion missionary pilot. I'm not sure. Figure out first what you think you want to do. Then item B, determine how many steps to get there. Let's take the airline thing. Well, if you are a pay-as-you-go, sorry I got this itch here. If you're a pay-as-you-go pilot, back to flight training that we talked about, there's going to be a bunch of steps. First step, I've got to get my commercial multi-engine instrument rating and probably my CFI, my flight instructor rating. Anywhere in the world, you got to get those, and a multi-engine rating. Now, I got to build some time, so I've either got to become a flight instructor, a co-pilot for a corporation, somehow, pipeline patrol. I don't know if they do those anymore. You got to find something that they'll let you do with less than 1,500 hours. That's step 2. When you get to 1,500 hours, then your step may be, well, I got to get on with somebody with more sophisticated equipment. I either want to be a regional airline pilot or I want to be some corporate pilot. I need to get in a jet airplane. Now, after I've built up a certain amount of experience in a jet airplane, then I could apply to 787 Central, and maybe they'll hire me as a first officer or an ERAU, what we call International Relief Officer, cruise pilot. So those are some typical steps. So that brings us to item C. You're going to have to do a lot of research. When you decide what you want to do, you're going to have to start studying. Who do they hire to be a 787 co-pilot? They don't hire you straight in as a 787 captain unless you've flown one before. That's pretty easy. So you got to figure out who are they hiring, because that tells you, and there's tons of services that you can find online. They'll tell you that the average new hire for United, I have no clue what it is when you look online, has 3,478 total flight time and 1,012 jet hours. I don't know. That's just something. But you can find out what it is. So you want to find out who are they hiring, what all their qualifications are. Then something real important that you don't think about when you're first starting out. What kind of place is it to work? Now, most airline places are unionized. I was a union airline pilot. I can't imagine being a non-union pilot because you're very disconnected from management. So if you don't have some work rules in place, that's kind of scary. Most corporations or smaller places are non-union, but you need to talk to people that are actually there. Excuse me. I knew I needed to take a drink. Pause. Goes back to your network. You need to talk to people who are there flying for that company, whether it's an airline, a regional thing. Find out how good or bad it is. I'm going to tell you, there's bads and the best of airlines. I love my time at KLM. Excuse me. Yep, wasn't quite ready. Stand by. I love my time at KLM, but the one thing I hated was the schedule. It was less than ideal. So there's always something bad, even in the best airline in the world. So find out what it is, because you don't want to spend your whole life working to get on board with this place and then find out, I hate the job. So find out about that. That might bring you right back to a new target job. Next thing, you're going to have to do a bunch of preparation when you finally get to the point of potentially being interviewed. You need to study about the company. You need to find out, do they ask you questions? They give you a simulator check, right? If they do, rent a simulator and prepare yourself. You don't go into these things haphazard. So you can see this is a pretty big process. You may be involved in this for years. For me, it was about a 10-year process. Just mind-boggling. Let's see. I started flying in 1976, and I did not make it to what I would call a real major airline until 1990. That's 14 years of flying various things. And I don't know how many airline interviews I did because, I hope I said the numbers right, 1980. I hope I didn't misquote that. I started let's see, now I get myself confused. I started flying 76, about 1990 till I got on board with a super big airline, KLM. So about 14-year process of going through these steps. It was very slow. Deregulation caused tons of furloughs and bankruptcies and restarts. But it's a process. I think it'll be a much shorter process for people today. Much, much shorter. But point G is important. You got to get ready for some rejections. It is highly unlikely, even with the tremendous shortage, that you're going to go through flight training, put a resume in, and have a perfect course with nothing ever happen. You're likely to go and people look at it and say, nah, we don't want you. Huh? I just spent thousands of dollars and 2 years of my life to do this, and you don't want me? It hurts. Man, I really... Scott, the other captain that I fly with, we were talking, I think we averaged like something around 9 to 10 interviews before we get a job. That's a lot of rejection slips that you would get. But that's how sometimes happen. The networking generally cuts that number in half because you've got a real positive thing, but there's a possibility some rejection. It's just part of the deal. It's not a fun part, but be prepared for it. All right, let's see. Okay, let's see what's going on up here. Okay, item E, Robinson says, requires a positive mindset. And yes, you get more no's than you get yes. Here's an experienced pilot speaking. The whole thing about these rejections, it's just brutal because you whether now you're doing online, but you do this, you travel out for the interview and go through this and use it as a waiting process. I just had a friend of mine who interviewed, I checked her out in a certain airplane. That's a lady. She's a very experienced pilot, about in her early 40s, so not new to there. She had got an interview with the big carrier in Dallas, Southwest Airlines, and looked like she fit pretty much all the profiles. She had people on the inside who were actually on the hiring committee, went through everything, blop, 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 sounded good. They started her background check and everything, said they call her in a week, and then boom, 3 days later, nope, we're not going to hire you. You have to reapply in a year. Then they never tell you why. That's what's really difficult, that can kind of slow you down in trying to find the pilot job that you'd like to have. That one is really difficult for everybody. I don't know anybody that does too well with that. So that is a pretty biggie. I hope all of you have great success in whatever you're doing and undertaking, finding your pilot job. And I hope it won't be like the pilots of my career. The thing that plagued us is we did go through all the training and we did finally get the job, but then the airline went bankrupt. And when you're flying for an airline that goes bankrupt, you lose all your seniority and your job. So you might be a captain there, but your next job, you're back to co-pilot, less pay, less good working conditions. It seems like in the United States that's condensed down, but as some of you who may be listening from around the globe, Monarch Airlines just declared bankruptcy in UK, ceased operations. Monarch was a big, what they call in the UK, holiday airline. They do charters for people. You know, boy, they just parked a whole bunch of airplanes. I flew for a while for a airline out of London called JMC. They were a competitor of Monarch. They're now in the label Thomas Cook. You know, it's a huge airline. Sometimes they go bankrupt. All this requires a very positive mental attitude. It's kind of a pretty big sacrifice to become a pilot. If anybody has any questions before I close out, just type them in there. I'll say a couple of closing thoughts, and if we don't have any more questions or comments, I'll close this out and it'll be available for people to rewatch on the replay. Well, kind of in the summary of everything today, if you got a question and want to log in, just type in. First of all, if you're looking to get a pilot job, you got to get trained. The training is pretty simple. Back to that slide, the training, let's see. In order to do that, and hit the right button, you got a choice of military, airline sponsor, to pay for yourself. So that's the first way you can get through training. The second item that you got to deal with is getting through this 1,500-hour barrier. You get all your ratings, but you're still not ready to go, even qualified to apply until you get that. There's several good options we talked about. Right now, if you're thinking about becoming a pilot, even if you have zero, because you got to start somewhere, you have zero flight time, nothing, start developing a network. People that you know that are in the aviation business, start making contact with them. They can give you tons of suggestions and help as you get down there. When you get that final stage, figuring out what you do, you got to pick what you want to be as a pilot, what kind of phase of aviation. You got to develop a plan. You're going to have to work hard, be prepared for a few rejections. Hey, I always love doing this. Thanks for everybody who tuned in and listened to the broadcast. I see we had a lot of listeners, but not everybody logged in, and it's kind of a little intimidating. Thanks for logging in, Thomas. Thanks, Robson. I hope you enjoy that a whole bunch. I'm going to be making a trip up to well up north into the Arctic to Churchill, Manitoba, to take my owners up to see some polar bears. It's a very remote airport. I think it's the last paved airport up there to the north there, because everything around there is gravel strips. So I'm going to be kind of out of pocket for a little bit. I doubt I'll do a broadcast next week, but maybe the following week. Keep following on Twitter, and I'll send out an email on anything I'm doing, and I will put this up within the next 24 hours so you can share that with your friends. Thanks a whole bunch. I'll just type a little thank you. Hope you keep up. Yeah, here we go. Thanks. Oops, I can't get that on my thing. Thanks for joining us today. That's awesome. Follow me on Twitter at JTWPilot for more updates. Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate it. Share this with some friends. Seems to be a lot of people interested in starting flying. I appreciate you listening to the live portion. Robson, thanks for the questions, and we will keep in touch. Until next time, thanks so much for watching. And this is James Weatherly for the